where we encountered the first violence, with John Lewis being pretty well beaten up.
The federal government finally intervened, and these early victories only encouraged us that we could do other things.
They were very smart, media-wise, because they dressed up. They put the ties on, they put the jackets on, they were looking good. And they are going up against the authority. They're going against the man. That was tremendously exciting to us as young white Southerners.
As the nonviolent concept grew, parallel to that was also the growth of an eye for an eye, violence. And there were many who were quite bright and quite gifted and honorable men and women who saw violence as an answer that just did not quite sit comfortably with the code that others of us had, saying that although racism was a cruel experience, we could not fight it by becoming racists.
In Birmingham, Alabama, the nation was treated with television images of black and white boys and girls having high-pressure fire hoses, slammed them up against the walls as they were peacefully demonstrating to end segregation. Police dogs biting them. These pictures were circulated all around the world. But those demonstrations were like a spark that ignited a prairie fire of black protests across the country.
And Kennedy, on the one hand, he's trying to win Africans and people and say, we are a better system than communism. And at the same time, there was this harsh treatment of black people that just didn't square in the final equation. And the more we were feisty in our demands of government, the more it revealed the weaknesses in our own construct.
What started out as the black Negro protests had developed into a Negro revolution.
There was a feeling that we would not be able to break the Deep South. So that March on Washington was to be the culmination of all of this intense organizing. It really has to be a moral crusade for the country.
The struggle for freedom in the United States had to move to the center of power, to where the president and the Congress were, that no matter how many demonstrations took place in Montgomery and in Birmingham and in places all around the South, that until you could change the central government, significant things wouldn't happen.
The March on Washington was an accumulation of all this. Of course, here would have been the biggest display of America in its most democratic moment, making a choice, and it was something that was emerging as a great demonstration as to the will of the people.
Well, it may be the last time you march on the Capitol.
That if that day erupted into violence, then our cause would be seriously reversed and hard to come by again.
Well, it may be the last time you march for your freedom. Maybe the last time, but I don't know. Singing, this may be the last time. This may be the last time. This may be the last time. Maybe the last time, but I don't know.
לפני כשנה הייתה לי פריצת דיסק בגב שהגבילה אותי מאוד בתנועה שלי, אם זה כשאני שוכב במיטה, אם אני צריך להסתובב, לקום מהמיטה, להיכנס למיטה, להיכנס לרכב, לצאת מהרכב. טיפלתי בפציעה הזאת על ידי פיזיותרפיה ועל ידי דיקור סיני, שמאוד שיפרו את המצב שלי אבל לא פתרו את המצב. לפני כחודשיים, שלושה, נחשפתי למכשיר של BQ לייזר ורכשתי את המכשיר. והתחלתי להשתמש בו לעשות טיפול נקודתי בגב תחתון, ובאמת כעבור שבועיים שלוש התחיל להיות שיפור דרסטי במצב שלי, ואפשר לומר שלמעשה הכאבים נעלמו, והיום אני עושה פעילות ספורטיבית בצורה חופשית ומתנועע בצורה חופשית ללא מגבלות. למעשה המכשיר הזה הוא סוג של מכשיר לייזר שנמצא בחלק מהקליניקות של הפיזיותרפיה, וכשהוא נמצא אצלך בבית ואתה יכול לעשות טיפולים יותר דחופים, וכשאתה יושב מול הטלוויזיה אז המכשיר הזה הוא באמת פונקציונלי למי שיש לו בעיות, ולא רק בעיות גב לדעתי. בשבילי ה-BQ לייזר עובד.
Beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. As far as the eye can see, there were just people.
It just blew everybody away. We had no idea there would be 250,000 people there.
Mothers with babies and strollers, church women with their church hats and pocketbooks and fancy shoes. And
It was walking down the street like you were moving as part of a glacier.
At that time, the largest assemblage of people in one spot in the history of the United States.
I had no expectation that I was preparing to step into an event that was going to transform my entire life. To be face-to-face and side-by-side with people who had made decisions to go up in the face of the police state atmosphere of the Deep South in order to get change was an overwhelming thought to me.
What I was looking for was the spirit, what Dr. King called the beloved community.
We had never worked on anything of that magnitude. Finally, there was going to be a coalition of the civil rights groups, which is what we had been hoping for many years.
We had a sense that we had slogged through some very terrible things. In a way, there was a huge release on that day.
I think there's sometimes when you know something is going to be historic. I remember it was hot. I remember what I was wearing. I remember singing. And I remember that ocean of people. I've never seen anything like it. I remember the electricity in the air.
Music had become the soundtrack of the American conscience, and particularly folk music, more than anything. And it was everywhere.
Whatever the perfect storm was that made civil rights, anti-war movement, the music, the Woodstock, it then included all ages.
And when people heard that and they sang that music together, it provided for them a moment where they weren't simply an audience, they were participants.
even if they go along with their daily lives, they can say, I'm a part of this, without being, a card-carrying member of some organization.
Many of the speakers were people whose names were familiar, but you never would get a chance to see them.
It wasn't just that they were sympathetic and very much involved in the ideals of the struggle. It was that that's who they really were. And they were artists and they were superstars. And that you could be both. A powerfully received force, and you can say the right thing. You can have a moral point of view.
I've always resented people who said it was a picnic. It was a day of solidarity. And as a byproduct of that, they saw wonderful things. If you've traveled all night on a bus and you see Harry Belafonte, that's a nice thing. Or if you hear Bobby Dylan sing. But nobody got the same reaction that John Lewis got in his speech or that Dr. King got.
I was aware that this was a time that John Lewis and Dr. King, they were coming into their own.
This is the first time most white people watching this on television had ever seen Dr. King give a full speech. So it was sort of breaking barriers to white people's understanding of the civil rights movement that could not have been done probably in any other way.
Everybody's not equal. Everybody can't vote. Don't have the same shot at raising a family with a future. I resolved at that moment I was going to be active. I was going to be a part of changing the country and raising these demands and lifting my voice with people who were doing everything they could.
It was a procession of church. It was never ever a march. It was a congregation that was answering the call. Not the speech in itself, but the gathering, that the speech was being given for the gathering.
I couldn't believe it. You know, I've been there for a whole week, and we worked in the office. We've done all these things, and now to see black, white, you know, Hispanic, you know, all religion, being there, it was a very touching moment for me.
We shall overcome someday.
For us, in the end, the day was a complete win-win. Kennedys heaved a huge sigh of relief that there was not one act of violence. And to see at the end everybody singing, "We shall overcome," and all the arms linked. We've said it often, but it's worth saying as often as necessary. There wasn't a dry eye in the house.
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
You'll notice the exact date, the exact issues to protest were changed several times. But in spring 1962, civil rights leaders announced they would have a march on Washington for jobs and freedom. You'll also notice they were immediately met with resistance. Even though Dr. King wrote to a colleague that the march could be one of the greatest demonstrations for freedom that has